now to news from Washington, where President Joe Biden's domestic agenda faces a series of make-or-break votes in Congress. At stake are two pieces of landmark legislation on infrastructure and on the economy. But divisions within the Democratic Party are threatening to undermine the president's plans. Now, that tussle comes as Congress is expected today to pass a bill to prevent a so-called government shutdown. Well, let's discuss this story with our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. And Doug, I think it's fair to say that some of these American congressional stories can be a little bit confusing, even for journalists like us who cover them regularly. Give us a sense of what's actually happening, because we're hearing this phrase that Biden's entire domestic agenda is hanging in the balance. What does that mean?
Well, exactly that. So much of his domestic policy, his ambitions, as he puts it, to build back better across the board, whether we're talking about social policies from climate change to healthcare to education, all of it has been sort of wrapped into an omnibus bill, and that bill is in jeopardy. And in jeopardy, really on a very broad level, because of the dysfunction, essentially, of Washington right now, the absolute polarization, but the staunch opposition of the Republican Party, and yes, you have to, let's name names here, of the Republican Party against any of the provisions in Biden's Build Back Better agenda. His critics say that this is not about a logical, opposition to a bill that they have concise issues with. It's more about, at any cost, dynamiting Joe Biden's legacy, his presidency, his agenda, bringing him down, undermining him in a very sort of Trump-like way. Look, today there's an infrastructure vote that the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi hopes to be able to get a vote on, and she hopes because she hopes to get to corral the votes in. There are a lot of rifts within the Democratic Party. The problem is a $1 trillion infrastructure and jobs bill, a bill to fortify roads, bridges, tunnels, transit, rural broadband networks, tons of stuff that badly need regeneration in America. The problem is, within the Democratic Party, forget the Republican opposition, that's a granted. Within the Democratic Party, there are rifts. Progressive wings, the left-leaning wing of the Democratic Party, is refusing to join this bill unless they get a guarantee that there will be votes on the bigger bill, the $3.5 trillion social policy bill. That's a separate piece of legislation. They don't have that yet.
Now, what are the chances that Joe Biden may be able to persuade some of the conservative-leaning holdouts within his party?
Extremely difficult. Listen, I said that the first bill we just talked about, the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, is what was called a bipartisan bill. It passed in the Senate in August. Done. It needs to get through the House now. This second bill, and this is the one that's becoming so contentious, the social policy bill, the so-called Build Back Better bill, the $3.5 trillion omnibus, this is called a reconciliation bill, a very big word which essentially means that the Democrats are trying to ram it through with only Democratic votes because they know they have zero Republicans on their side for it, zero. So they need to get in a Congress which is on a razor's edge with a bare 51 Democratic majority. They have to get it through. How do they do that when you have two notable holdouts, two conservative-leaning senators, one from West Virginia named Joe Manchin, another from Arizona named Kyrsten Sinema? These two people single-handedly could bring Joe Biden's entire domestic agenda crashing down. They say, Manchin says it's fiscal insanity, this $3.5 trillion spending bill. Kyrsten Sinema is also sitting on the fence for now. She was at the White House yesterday. Biden has personally been trying to solicit her. Very, very difficult. If they don't get on board, the Democrats could lose this vote on the biggest piece of legislation in Joe Biden's, and you can argue in any president's agenda in the last 20 to 30 years.
And I mentioned as well, Doug, this government shutdown, congressmen and women racing to avoid that shutdown today. What are we expecting to happen?
It's almost unbelievable that we almost have to have the shutdown, looming shutdown and debt failure as the third question. Like we almost didn't get around to talking about it. And that's because the first two are extremely important. They're the entire domestic agenda. But there is, on a separate front, a vote looming today to have a stopgap. That basically means a stopgap spending measure to pass the votes just to keep the government operating for a few more weeks. This will not resolve the problem because you still have what's called the debt ceiling, which must be raised. And the Republicans are not giving the Democrats any wiggle room on helping them to raise the debt ceiling. That, if it weren't raised by October 18th, according to the Treasury Secretary, could leave the American economy swooning, spiraling into a recession, stock markets plunging with reverberations across the planet. This is just a stopgap spending bill. It is expected to pass, but after today, you'll have the far larger problem looming called how to raise the debt ceiling. I'll talk about that another day. It could be an hour's worth of my commentary.
All right, lots to get through.
Yeah.
We'll talk